When I look around my quiet house now, I can hear every little sound: the ticking of the old clock on the wall, the creak of the wooden floor, even the wind brushing against the curtains. For years, I used to wish for a moment like this: a bit of peace, a bit of stillness. But now that it's here, it feels too quiet, too empty. There was a time when this house was never silent. The sound of laughter used to fill every corner. My children's voices, the smell of food cooking on the stove, the door opening and closing as someone always came rushing in or out. Back then, I used to think I was tired. Tired of the noise, the endless chores, the constant calls for Amma. I didn't realize how much those sounds meant until they were gone. All my life, I believed helping others was my purpose. If someone needed advice, I was there. If a neighbor fell sick, I cooked for them. If my children needed something, anything, I dropped everything to be by their side. It made me happy to see others happy. It gave me meaning. But the thing about always being the one who helps is that people start to believe you don't need help yourself. They think you're strong, that you'll always be fine, that you'll somehow keep standing even when no one stands beside you. I used to tell myself, this is love, this is family. That's what love was supposed to look like, right? Giving without expecting, caring without counting. That's what my mother taught me. And for a long time, I truly believed it. But life has a strange way of testing what we believe in. Sometimes it takes everything you have, all your love, all your patience, and gives you silence in return. And that silence, that's where the truth hides. I remember the day I finally noticed how alone I'd become. It wasn't a dramatic day. No arguments, no tears, just a simple afternoon when I sat down with a cup of tea and realized there was no one left to make a second cup for. No one calling my name. No one needing me anymore. And that was when the thought quietly entered my mind, a thought I had never dared to say out loud. I spent my whole life helping others, but when I needed someone, no one was there. That moment changed something in me. It didn't break me. It just made me see things differently. And this story, my story, is about that realization. It's about love, kindness, and what happens when we forget to keep a little bit of it for ourselves.
I was never the kind of woman who could stay still when someone else was in need. Even as a young girl, I felt responsible for everyone around me. My parents, my siblings, even the neighbors who came to borrow sugar or salt. Helping made me feel useful. It made me feel seen. Maybe that's where it all began, that quiet habit of putting everyone else before myself. When I married my husband, I was barely 22. He was kind, calm and hardworking, with soft eyes that always seemed to understand more than he said. We didn't have much when we started out: a small rented house, 2 steel plates, and an old fan that made more noise than wind. But we had dreams. And love, that gentle, unspoken kind that grows through years of shared mornings and tired nights. When our first child was born, I remember sitting by the window, holding that tiny body in my arms, feeling something I'd never felt before. A kind of love that didn't fit into words. I whispered to him, I'll always be here for you. And I meant it. Every part of me meant it. 2 more children followed, a daughter and another son. Life became a blur of cooking, washing, teaching, and comforting. My day started before the sun rose and ended long after everyone went to bed. Sometimes I used to feel invisible, like the air everyone breathed, but no one noticed. But then one of my children would say, Amma, I love you. And suddenly, it was all worth it again. My husband used to tell me, Meena, you do too much. Take a rest sometimes. But I'd laugh and say, if I don't do it, who will? He'd shake his head, smiling, knowing there was no use arguing. Because I wasn't doing it out of duty, I did it out of love. I believed love meant giving everything you had and then finding a way to give a little more. Years went by. We moved into our own home. I made it warm and bright, curtains that smelled of sunlight, plants by the window, and a kitchen always full of something cooking. Everyone who came said, it feels peaceful here. And that made me proud because that's what I wanted, a home where people felt loved. I helped neighbors when their babies were sick. I made food for families who couldn't afford much. If someone was getting married, I was the first to help set up the decorations or pack sweets. Even when I was tired, I'd say, it's fine, I'll manage. I always managed. When my children grew older, I thought life would get easier. But motherhood doesn't end when your children grow. It just changes shape. You stop worrying about scraped knees and start worrying about their hearts. You wonder if they're eating enough, if their bosses are kind, if they still remember the way home feels. My eldest son got married first. His wife, my daughter-in-law, was young, shy, and a little distant at first. I tried my best to make her feel welcome. I cooked her favorite dishes, gave her space, and treated her like my own daughter. It wasn't easy for her either, moving into a new home, adjusting to our ways, but I hoped over time we'd grow close. After all, that's what family does, learns, forgives, and finds love in between. My daughter married next, and then my younger son moved abroad for work. Suddenly, the house started to feel quieter. At first, I enjoyed it. There was time to rest, time to sit with my husband and drink evening tea without interruptions. We'd talk about small things, the neighbors, the news, the smell of rain, simple joys. But time has its own plans. My husband fell ill one winter. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but within months his body grew weak. I spent every night by his side, feeding him soup, adjusting his blanket, praying silently for a miracle. And when that miracle didn't come, I told myself, at least he didn't suffer long. But I did. I suffered quietly in ways words can't hold. After he passed, the house changed. Even the walls seemed different. The laughter that once echoed had vanished. The clock still ticked, but the time didn't feel alive anymore. My children tried to comfort me. They called, they visited, but slowly those visits grew fewer and the calls shorter. Everyone had their lives, their families, their worries, and I understood. I told myself, this is how life goes. You raise them to fly, and one day you look up and realize they've flown too far to hear your voice anymore. I started spending my days helping others again. Old habits never die easily. If a neighbor was unwell, I brought them food. If someone needed company, I sat with them. I found peace in helping. It reminded me I still mattered. But deep down, something inside me had started to ache. A quiet ache that came when the evenings turned long and the house went silent. I'd sit in the same spot on the veranda where my husband once read his newspaper, and I'd look down the street waiting for someone to wave, someone to come by. Most days, no one did. Still, I didn't complain. I told myself, this is love, this is my purpose. Even if no one remembered me, I remembered them. Even if no one came to me, I'd go to them because that's who I was, the woman who couldn't say no. Looking back now, I realize I built my whole life around others' needs. Their happiness became my measure of success. Their smiles were my reward. And maybe, just maybe, that's why I didn't see the small cracks forming around me. The tiny moments when I was no longer needed, no longer asked for, no longer remembered.
It happened so slowly that I almost didn't notice it at first. Life has a way of changing in quiet steps, doesn't it? One day you're surrounded by people, and the next you realize they've all drifted away. Not because they stopped loving you, but because they got busy loving their own lives. After my husband passed, my eldest son insisted I move in with him. He said, Amma, you shouldn't live alone. Come stay with us. The kids will love having you around. At first, I was touched. It felt comforting to know I still belonged somewhere. So I packed a few things, my clothes, my husband's old photo, and the small wooden jewelry box he gave me years ago. And I moved into their home. For a while, it was lovely. The children were full of energy, their laughter echoing through the house, just like my own used to. I helped my daughter-in-law with the cooking, picked up the children from school, and told bedtime stories about their grandfather. It made me feel needed again, useful, alive. But slowly, something changed. It started with small things. My daughter-in-law would sigh when I offered to help in the kitchen. She'd say, Amma, please rest. You don't have to do everything. Her tone was polite, but her eyes told another story. A quiet irritation, as if my presence disrupted her rhythm. I tried to stay out of her way, spending more time with the children. They adored me, at least in the beginning. But as they grew older, school and friends took over their time. And one evening, when I went to tell them a story, my grandson said, Not tonight, Amma, I'm busy. That word, busy, it echoed in my heart. I'd heard it before, from my own children, from neighbours, from life itself. Everyone was always busy. So I found myself sitting quietly in the living room most evenings, knitting or watching television, while the rest of the family scrolled through their phones or talked amongst themselves. They weren't unkind, just distracted. And somehow, that hurt even more. I remember one Sunday afternoon. I had spent the whole morning preparing a meal. Chicken curry, biryani, kheer, all their favorites. When my husband came home, he smiled, Smells amazing, Amma. But then the phone rang, and within minutes they were all getting ready to leave. A friend's invitation, a quick lunch out. They said, We'll eat later. I smiled and said, Of course, go ahead. And when the door closed behind them, I sat alone at the table, staring at the food that was still steaming, untouched. That was the first time I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears that fell into my lap as I told myself, it's okay. They're young, let them enjoy their lives. But deep inside, something felt heavier, like I was slowly disappearing from the picture. A few months later, my daughter invited me to stay with her for a while. She said, Amma, you've been with Bhai for so long. Come to my place now. You'll get a change. So I packed my things again. I thought maybe a new house, new faces would make the loneliness fade. At first it did. My daughter and I used to talk for hours about her childhood, about my husband, about all the things we missed. But slowly, life caught up there too. She had a job, a husband, children of her own. And I found myself sitting alone again, this time in a new living room, surrounded by different furniture, but the same silence. One evening, I overheard her husband say, Your mother means well, but she's been here for quite some time now. He wasn't rude, just practical. But those words sank deep. They made me realize something I had tried not to face. I didn't belong anywhere anymore. Not fully, not like before. So I told my daughter, I want to go back home. She looked surprised. Amma, are you sure? You'll be alone. I smiled and said, I'm used to that now. She hugged me tight. And when she let go, I could feel her relief hiding behind her love. When I returned home, everything was just as I had left it, quiet, still, untouched. The plants had wilted, the curtains smelled of dust, and the air felt heavier than before. But it was my space, mine, and even though it was lonely, it felt honest. In the days that followed, I tried to fill my time again. I joined a local women's group, helped at the temple, and visited neighbors. People were kind. They'd smile and say, "You're such a blessing, Auntie." And for a moment, I'd feel that warmth again, that little spark of purpose. But every evening, when I returned home, the silence greeted me at the door like an old friend who never left. One afternoon, I decided to visit my younger son, who had returned from abroad. I hadn't seen him in over 2 years. I was excited. I baked his favorite cake, wrapped a small gift, and wore the blue sari he once said, "Looks beautiful on you, Amma." When I reached his house, he looked genuinely happy to see me. But his wife's expression was different. Polite, smiling, but distant. I felt it immediately. That invisible wall some people build with their silence. We sat together and I tried to make conversation, but every topic seemed to turn awkward, like there were unspoken words hanging between us. When she left the room, my son sighed and said, "Amma, you should have called first." She wasn't prepared. I laughed softly. Prepared for what? Her mother in law? He smiled weakly, not knowing what to say. That night, when I went to bed, I could hear them whispering in the next room. Not arguing, just talking softly, but my name was mentioned more than once. I knew then. I didn't need to hear the words to understand the feeling. Sometimes your presence becomes a burden even to the ones you love most. The next morning, I packed quietly. My son looked confused. "Amma, you're leaving already?" I smiled and said, "Yes, beta. I have things to do back home." He hugged me, said, "At least stay for breakfast." But I couldn't, because staying would mean pretending I didn't feel what I felt. And I was too tired to pretend anymore. When I reached home that day, I sat on the veranda again. The same spot where my husband used to sit with his newspaper. The sun was setting and the air smelled of dust and jasmine. I looked around and realized there was no one to wait for. And yet, I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I felt a strange calmness. Maybe because I finally saw things for what they were. Not cruel, not unfair, just real. People move on. Children grow up. The world doesn't stop for anyone, not even the one who once held it all together. Still, a small part of me kept wondering, did I do something wrong? Did I give too much? Was I too soft? Or maybe I made it too easy for everyone to take me for granted. Because I was always there. Always ready, always available, always smiling. I never said no. Not once. And maybe, just maybe, that's why they forgot how to value my yes. The hardest part wasn't being alone. It was realizing that I had built my whole identity around being needed. And when no one needed me anymore, I didn't know who I was. I would wake up in the mornings and sit on the edge of the bed thinking, who am I now, if not a mother, a wife, a helper? Some days I tried to stay busy, cleaning, cooking, gardening. Other days I just sat with old photo albums. There were so many faces smiling back at me. Birthdays, weddings, festivals, moments filled with love. And I'd whisper, where did everyone go? But no one answered. It was during those quiet evenings that I began to talk to myself more. Not out loud,
But inside, my thoughts became my company. And though it sounds sad, in some strange way, I started to find comfort there, in my own company, in my own silence. But I didn't reach peace right away. Before that came the hardest chapter of all, the moment that broke me open and changed everything. The moment I finally understood what it truly means to help others and what it costs when you forget to help yourself.
It was a few weeks after my 65th birthday. No one had really celebrated it. My daughter had sent a quick voice note, "Happy birthday, Amma! I'll call you later." My sons had messaged me on WhatsApp. No cakes, no phone calls, no laughter. Just silence, filled with polite wishes. I told myself it was fine. After all, they were busy. They had their lives. But that night, when I sat alone at the dining table with a small cup of tea, something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was something quieter, something like realization. A soft voice whispering, "You've given so much, but you've forgotten yourself." The next morning, I decided to visit the temple. It had been years since I'd gone there properly, not just to pray, but to sit, to breathe. The air smelled of incense and marigold flowers. The bells rang softly, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something move inside me. Not pain, not joy, just presence. I sat there for a long time, eyes closed, listening to the murmurs of people coming and going. An older woman sat beside me. Her hair was silver, tied neatly in a bun, her sari faded, but clean. She smiled at me and said, "You come here often?" I shook my head. "Not really. I used to, long ago." She nodded. "Same for me. I stopped after my husband passed. Spent years at home waiting for someone to need me again." I looked at her surprised. She continued softly. "Then I realized, sometimes we wait our whole lives for others to fill a space that only we can fill." Her words stayed with me. That day when I returned home, the silence didn't feel so heavy. For the first time, I didn't try to escape it. I just sat with it, as if it were an old friend, finally ready to speak. A few days later, I got a call from my daughter-in-law. Her tone was polite, but distant. "Amma, we're moving to a new house. It's a bit smaller, so maybe you can stay in your own place for now. We'll visit often." I felt that familiar ache in my chest. Not sharp, just dull and deep. I said quietly, "Of course, Beta. I understand." When I hung up, I placed the phone on the table and just sat there. It wasn't new. It wasn't unexpected. But somehow, hearing it spoken aloud, that gentle distancing, that invisible line being drawn, made everything real. I realized then that no one was going to come and make me feel whole again. If I wanted to feel alive, I'd have to do it myself. That night, I went through my old drawers. Letters, photos, recipes written in faded ink, small pieces of a life built around others. And as I looked through them, I realized how much of myself I had given away in tiny pieces. To my husband, my children, my neighbors, my friends. There wasn't much left that was only mine. Then I found an old notebook, one that I had kept when I was young. Inside there were pages filled with my handwriting, poems, small notes, dreams I had once written down. One line caught my eye. It said, "One day
I will learn something just for myself. I stared at it for a long time, and then I smiled. Not sadly, but softly, like meeting a younger version of myself. That night, I made a decision. A small one, but it felt big to me. I decided that from the next morning, I would start doing things for myself, even if no one else noticed. The next day, I woke up early. I made my tea, stepped outside, and watched the sunrise. The light touched the tops of the trees, and the world seemed brand new. It had been years since I'd noticed the morning like that. I started going for short walks. At first, just around the block. The neighbors smiled and greeted me. Some even joined me for a few minutes. I began to enjoy those walks. The sound of birds, the smell of wet soil after watering the plants. It was simple, but it made me feel alive again. Then, one afternoon, I saw a small sign outside the community center. It said, "Free art class. All ages welcome." I stood there for a moment, reading it again and again. I hadn't picked up a paintbrush in decades, but something about it called to me. So I walked inside. There were a few women there, some younger, some older. The instructor smiled and said, "Welcome, Auntie. Would you like to try?" I nodded shyly. It's been a long time. She handed me a brush and some colors. At first, my hands trembled. I didn't know what to paint. So I just started with the sky. Soft blue with bits of light breaking through. When I finished, the instructor said gently, "It's beautiful, peaceful." I smiled. It's how I want to feel. That painting still hangs in my living room today. Every time I look at it, it reminds me of that moment. The moment I started to come back to myself. A few months later, I began volunteering at a nearby orphanage. The first day, I wasn't sure what I could offer, but the children welcomed me with open arms. They called me Amma, just like my own once did. And suddenly, I realized I hadn't stopped being a mother. I just stopped believing I could still be one. Those children filled a space in my heart I didn't know was empty. Their laughter echoed through my days. Their hugs warmed my evenings. And yet, this time it was different. I wasn't giving to feel needed. I was giving because it made me happy. That's when I finally understood something I had never allowed myself to see. All those years, I had believed that my worth came from how much I did for others. But real worth, it comes from knowing who you are, even when no one is asking anything of you. One afternoon, while I was helping a little girl with her homework, my phone rang. It was my eldest son. "Amma," he said, sounding uncertain. "It's been a while. How are you?" I smiled. "I'm good, Beta. Very good, actually." He paused. "We've been meaning to visit. The kids miss you." I said gently, "Then come when you can. I'll be here." He hesitated, maybe surprised by my calm tone, and then said, "Are you happy there, alone?" I looked around, at the children laughing, at the walls painted in bright colors, at my own heart that no longer felt heavy. And I said, "Yes, I'm not alone anymore. I have myself." There was silence on the other end, then a soft laugh. "I'm glad, Amma," he said quietly. When I hung up, I sat for a moment, holding the phone to my chest. I didn't cry this time. I just smiled, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to make me feel whole. I had found wholeness in my own two hands, in my own heart. A few weeks later, My daughter came to visit. She looked around the house, saw the paintings on the wall, the fresh flowers in the vase, the little clay pots I had painted. She said softly, "Amma, you've changed. You look peaceful." I smiled. Maybe I finally learned what peace looks like. We sat on the veranda, just like old times. She leaned on my shoulder and whispered, "I'm sorry, Amma. I should have been there more." I touched her hand. "No, Beta. You were where you needed to be. So was I." She looked at me, tears in her eyes. "But weren't you lonely?" I thought for a moment and said, "Yes. But sometimes loneliness teaches us what love never could." That night, after she left, I stood by the window and watched the stars. The same stars I used to look at years ago when I prayed for my family's happiness. And I realized I still wanted them to be happy, but I also wanted that for myself now. Not in a selfish way, but in a way that honored all the years I had spent giving. Because I finally understood something simple and true. You can pour love into others all your life, but if you never leave a little for yourself,
one day you'll wake up empty. And emptiness isn't noble. It's painful. Love isn't meant to erase you. It's meant to include you. That was my turning point. Not a loud event, not a dramatic scene, just a quiet awakening. A moment when I stopped chasing gratitude and started finding peace. When I stopped waiting for someone to fill my silence and learned to fill it with my own laughter instead. Now, every morning, I make tea for myself and sit by the window. Sometimes my children call, sometimes they don't, but I've stopped measuring love by how often the phone rings. Because real love, the one that lasts, starts from within.
Mornings feel different now. There's no rush, no noise, no voices calling for breakfast or missing socks. The air feels still, almost secret. I wake up before the sun rises, wrap my shawl around me, and make my tea the way I like it. Not too sweet, not too strong. I sit by the window, watching the light stretch across the sky, and I whisper to myself, This is peace. I never knew peace could sound like silence. All my life, I thought love meant doing, giving, serving, fixing. But now I know love can also mean being still, being present, being enough. When I walk to the market these days, the shopkeepers greet me with a smile. "Good morning, Amma," they say, and I smile back, carrying my small basket of vegetables and flowers. I used to feel invisible in those crowded places. Now I feel like part of something, not because anyone notices me more, but because I notice myself. There's an old woman who sells flowers near the bus stop. Every day she ties jasmine garlands with wrinkled fingers. One morning, she handed me a small garland and said, "This one's for you, no charge." I smiled and asked, "Why for me?" She shrugged and said, "Because you smile like someone who's found something she thought she'd lost." Her words stayed with me all day. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had found something, not outside, but within. A few weeks later, I was invited to a small gathering at the community center. They were celebrating women of the neighborhood, those who volunteered, taught, or helped others. They asked me to speak. At first, I hesitated. What would I say? I wasn't anyone special, just a mother, a woman who had loved and lost, and then somehow found herself again. But that night, I stood in front of a small crowd of women, some young, some my age, some older, and I spoke from my heart. I said, "For many years, I believed my worth came from how much I gave to others, my family, my children, my home. And when they no longer needed me, I thought I had nothing left to offer. But I was wrong. We never lose our worth just because life changes. we only lose sight of it. And when we start seeing ourselves again, not as mothers, wives, or caretakers, but as women, something inside us begins to heal. The room went quiet. Some women had tears in their eyes, and for the first time, I didn't feel small or forgotten. I felt seen, not by them, but by myself. After the event, a young woman came to me. She looked tired, her voice trembling a little. She said, "Auntie, I've been taking care of everyone. My parents, my husband, my kids. I feel like I've disappeared." I held her hand and said softly, "You're still there, Betha. You just need to turn around and see yourself again." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and I realized that's all most of us need: permission to see ourselves without guilt. Life hasn't become perfect. Some days the loneliness still visits me. Some evenings I still catch myself looking at old photographs a little too long. But the difference is I don't break anymore. I let the ache sit beside me like an old companion, sip my tea and remind myself that this too is part of living. I don't chase love now. I nurture it in small ways, in gentle moments. A child's laughter at the orphanage, the scent of freshly baked bread, the warmth of sunlight on my face. They're all tiny reminders that life still holds beauty, even in its quietest corners. One evening, my daughter visited again. She found me painting by the veranda, a small canvas filled with soft colors of dawn. She sat beside me and watched for a while before asking, "Amma, don't you ever miss how things used to be?" I smiled. "Sometimes I do, but I don't want to live there anymore. The past taught me how to love others. The present is teaching me how to love me." She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "You sound so free." I looked at her, smiled, and said, "I am, Betta. Freedom isn't about leaving people. It's about returning to yourself." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat like that for a long time. No words, no expectations, just peace. Later that night, as I wrote in my journal, I found myself thinking about all the women like me, mothers who gave everything and forgot how to keep something for themselves. I wanted to tell them, you are not selfish for wanting time for yourself. You're not ungrateful for craving silence. You are not unloved just because others stopped saying it. You are still whole, still worthy, still enough. Because love, the kind that lasts, doesn't end when people walk away. It begins when you finally decide to stay with yourself, to stay kind to your own heart, to stay patient with your own healing. Now, every evening, I light a small lamp in front of the window. It's a quiet ritual, not for any god or wish, just a thank you. A thank you to the woman I used to be and the one I've become. A thank you to life for breaking me just enough to make me rebuild myself. A thank you to silence for teaching me to listen. When I blow out the lamp before bed, I always whisper one thing: "You did well today." It's something I never used to hear from anyone else, so now I give it to myself. And maybe that's what self-worth really means. Not pride, not ego, just a quiet knowing that even if no one else sees your light, it's still there. That even if no one says thank you, your kindness still matters. Because being a mother taught me how to love others, but finding myself again, that taught me how to love me. For years, I waited for someone to tell me I was enough. But I've learned the only voice that truly matters is the one inside me. The one that says, "You have given, you have loved, and now it's time to live for you." And if no one's told you lately, you too deserve that kind of peace.
You know, for a long time, I believed love was something you proved through sacrifice, through silence, through staying when it hurt. I thought if I gave enough, if I tried hard enough, maybe people would see me.
Maybe they would love me the way I loved them. But somewhere between taking care of everyone else and forgetting how to rest, I lost the sound of my own heartbeat. I became everyone's comfort, but no one's priority. And when the house grew quiet, I didn't know who I was anymore. Without the cooking, the cleaning, the helping, the giving, without someone needing me. But life has a gentle way of teaching you, not through big lessons or loud moments, but through the quiet ones, through the evenings when you sit alone with your tea and realize the silence isn't punishing you, it's healing you. Through the mornings when you wake up and notice the sunlight doesn't need permission to enter your room, it just comes. That's when it hit me. All my life, I waited for someone to fill my emptiness, but what I really needed was to stop running from it. Because sometimes the most beautiful thing we can do is simply sit with ourselves, without fixing, without apologizing, without wishing to be someone else's enough. I used to think I was weak for caring too much. Now I see my heart was strong enough to love even when it was breaking. I used to think I was foolish for giving without limits. Now I see giving was never the problem, forgetting myself was. So I started small. I learned to make tea just the way I like it. I bought flowers, not for anyone else, just for me. I walked without rushing. I spoke kindly to myself. And slowly, the woman I thought was lost came back home. You see, love doesn't disappear when others walk away. It simply changes direction. Sometimes it turns inward, back to the heart that gave too much, back to the hands that held everyone else together, back to the soul that deserves rest. So, if you've spent your life giving and now find yourself standing in the quiet, wondering where everyone went, please remember this. You are not forgotten. You are not used up. You are not done. You are still love itself, soft, steady, radiant. And when you finally begin to see your own worth, you stop begging to be seen. You stop chasing appreciation. You stop apologizing for existing. You simply breathe. You simply are. And that, my dear, is where peace lives. So tonight, when you close your eyes, tell yourself what I now tell myself every night. You have given enough. You have loved enough. And now it's time to love yourself enough. Because you deserve that kind of love too.